Rachel Edidin.
And I'm Miles Stokes.
And we're the hosts of Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men, a weekly podcast all about the ins, outs, and retcons of our favorite superhero soap opera.
We're also the co-hosts of Rachel and Miles Review the X-Men,
which you're watching right now,
where we talk about the X books that come out each week.
Now, this week, we're going to be looking at the books that came out on April 22nd. And if you've been following the news, you know that one of those books has been getting a lot of press. We're going to be spending a little bit more time on All New X-Men number 40. There will be spoilers in the extended discussion, but we'll do a cursory spoiler-free review beforehand so that if you're avoiding that, you can just cut out at that point. We'll let you know.
We'll put up our big spoiler flags, wear our spoiler hats, that sort of thing. So we have 4 books for this week. Let's dive on in. We'll start off with Guardians of the Galaxy and X-Men, The Black Vortex, Omega number 1, which is to say the only number. This is written by Sam Humphries, with pencils by Ed McGuinness and Javier Garrón, inks by a few different people, and colors by Marte Gracia. So that's it. 13 parts later, this storyline is over.
Our long national nightmare has finally ended.
It's, if you've watched previous reviews, you know that Rachel and I have been mixed to negative on this crossover. It's not that it hasn't been an okay story, it's just that it's felt very superfluous.
It's an okay story. There's just way, way, way more of it than there needs to be.
Absolutely, and even at an accelerated publishing schedule, getting sometimes up to 3 parts a week, that's still a whole lot of content where, despite there being some consequences, not a lot happens. Now, that being said, this is a pretty satisfying end to the story. It wraps everything up relatively neatly. It does feature some really excellently over-the-top space opera stuff, like a giant space kitty unfazing the amber shell surrounding the planet Spartax from the planet itself.
I should say a giant space kitty pride, obviously, not like meow.
Right, not like, not Nyan Cat or anything.
Although, man,
like
a giant space, that would be so great.
That would have made a more engaging crossover, I think.
And then the thing that happened with our kitty at the end could have happened with that instead, and I'd be less irritated. I am told that the major plot development toward the end of this book is something that I would find less unfounded and obnoxious if I had been following Star-Lord, but I haven't, so, that bothered me.
From an X perspective, the climax of the story, or the denouement, or whatever it is, does seem to really come out of nowhere. We get some cool character moments. The writers definitely have all the characters' voices relatively down. I can't really fault them for that. And we do have some consequences, but I would question whether the consequences from this story really had to happen in this story, whether they could have happened in the sort of parent books of those characters.
I will say the art is spectacular.
Yeah.
There's a lot of big, massive, fancy cosmic stuff happening, and it's executed very well.
Yeah, so if you really like space opera, or if you really like Guardians of the Galaxy, honestly, more than X-Men, this storyline could be worth your while, maybe in a trade or something, where it feels less sort of sprawly. But otherwise, I think you can just, check Wikipedia for what happens at the end of this, and move on with your life.
Next up is Wolverines number 15, written by Ray Fox, with art by Juan Doe. And man, I gotta say, the art in this is so good. I mean, everything Doe does is good, but...
Yeah, this book's really had a very exaggerated style in terms of both the book's own tone, in terms of the plot, and seeing art that matches that, I really enjoy.
Well, they've done a really good job of putting together a rotating lineup of artists whose styles mix and match very nicely together. So it's still sort of in a common tone and a common feel. But I gotta say, man, Doe is just heads and tails above.
Mm-hmm.
So this issue continues the saga of Daken and X-23 going after Symbiote, hanging out with, not Symbiote, I'm sorry, what's his name?
Siphon. Yeah,
obviously a deeply memorable villain. Hanging out with Blade, having Bladey hijinks.
Oh man, Blade. So I have a deep and abiding love of Blade that probably started when I got my father's issue of Tomb of Dracula where he first appeared, with the wooden knives and the amazing, colorful glasses and stuff. And, this is very much movie Blade, but I'm also totally okay with that. At one point, Siphon grabs his sword, and, the little knife things come out of the hilt and cut Siphon's fingers off, and it's awesome.
So this is, the parts of it that I like most, because obviously Daken and X-23 have their own drama going on, but we get more of Mystique plotting and specifically having to play the rest of a crew that's starting to figure out that she's a few steps ahead and definitely has her own agenda. And sneaky super spy Mystique is my favorite Mystique.
Oh, absolutely. I gotta say, I've really been enjoying Laura's character development as well. I like the fact that she's really become, in some ways, the hero of the book. She's probably the most sympathetic character, and she's also becoming one of the canniest. She herself is one step ahead of a lot of the characters as well, and also really has a heart in a way that none of the other characters do. She's trying to take care of Daken in ways that, honestly, he doesn't particularly deserve. So it's nice seeing that. I mean, she really is coming out of this smelling like bloody, knifey roses.
Yeah, I mean, it's ironic to say in a book called The Wolverines, but it's really nice it's been really nice, especially over the last few years, seeing her grow into a character who's defined by more than being Wolverine's angstier clone.
Mm-hmm. Next is Amazing X-Men number 19, written by Christopher Yost with art by Jorge Fornes and colors by Rochelle Rosenberg. And if we look a little different than we did before, it's because in between the last review and this one, we went and saw Polaris.
We should say that's the house band from the amazing 90s TV show The Adventures of Pete and Pete, not the lady with the green hair and the magnet powers.
Right, I mean, we would have seen her too, but she wasn't playing in Portland tonight.
They were so good.
They were pretty great.
Can we just review them the rest of this week?
I mean, we
and
could,
find them awesome
we should
and
talk
amazing.
We should talk about comics too. Amazing X-Men number 19. This is actually the end of Amazing X-Men. It's wrapping up before Secret Wars gets going. And so it's the last chapter of the once and future Juggernaut. And I personally really like this one, both as a conclusion and as a single issue. It opens the first number of pages with sort of a almost medieval art-looking 4-panel split about Cyttorak, Colossus, Xavier, and Cain Marko, and sort of what each of them have done over the course of their lives, paralleling each of them. And it works really well. And at that point, then it cuts into Colossus going after Cyttorak, and ultimately that storyline being resolved. But I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the heroism and the villainy very clearly defined. It's nice to see an X-Men every once in a while.
I was going to say I kind of miss when Cain Marko was a more nuanced character, but I was looking back and I realized that it's mostly just that he's been written wildly inconsistently.
That may be true, yeah. But I mean, he always does kind of return to that same point of frustration and anger, and this story captures it pretty well. It's also just nice seeing, I guess you could call it a redemption story for Colossus. He's been through a lot of horrible stuff for a long time, and I think the best he's been written lately, which was in Dennis Hopeless's Cable and X-Force.
Yeah, by a fairly wide margin.
Yeah, he was still at a very low point, so it's nice seeing him kind of get himself together and basically stop being so emo. That was very satisfying.
Last but not least, we have All New X-Men number 40, written by Brian Michael Bendis, drawn by Mahmoud Asrar, and colored by Rain Barreto. As we mentioned in the intro, we're going to be breaking this review up into two parts. In the first one, we're going to talk about the issue as a whole. We'll avoid major spoilers. And in the second one, we'll let you know when that happens. We're going to go into more detail about the revelation that's kind of had the internet aflame this week.
Mm-hmm. So the issue itself.
The issue itself. Okay, so this is sort of a quiet moment story. The X-Men, the all-new X-Men, have just come back from space from the events of Black Vortex. And if you haven't read this week's comics yet, you definitely want to read Black Vortex Omega before All New X-Men, assuming you've been following both.
Yeah, there are some pretty major consequences from the Black Vortex for one character in particular, and having context for those is very helpful.
Right, and I will say, actually, speaking of that character, this is an issue for which discussion of one particular character has kind of eclipsed all else, but I really like the way Angel is written in here.
Yeah, me too. It's always really cool to see when the all-new X-Men, when they start to really differ from their older adult, mainstream 616 counterparts. And I think, especially for a character that writers over the years have had as hard a time with as Angel, seeing him really develop not only a distinct, but a very different personality in this incarnation has been really cool.
Agreed. Something else that we both sort of zeroed in on when we were talking about this earlier, between ourselves, is just how good Asrar and Barreto are on it. They are a terrific art team in general, and Asrar has really sort of clean lines, and Barreto's super sort of bright, saturated colors feel like a really good fit for this book, and especially for this story and sort of them returning to Earth, being outside, getting regrounded and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, what we have in this issue is basically a whole bunch of talking heads, and that can be super boring when done incorrectly. I mean, aside from the whole Utopians thing, which is a little more action-y.
Yeah, that's quite a reveal on the last spread, by the way, speaking of things that we're not going to spoil.
Yes, the art team of this book manages to make all the talking head scenes very, very engaging, not just because of the dialogue themselves, but just following the nuances and subtleties of the facial expressions and body language of the characters.
Yeah, Asrar is a really good storyteller, and he's also a very, very expressive artist, which I think is really important, considering that All New X-Men is kind of the book that takes us back to the core concept and the core conceit of X-Men, which is teenagers having feelings.
And, readers reading about those teenagers having feelings, and then themselves having feelings.
Speaking of having feelings and readers, I think that it's probably time to move on to the big thing. If you are avoiding spoilers, and you have somehow managed to get to this video without seeing any this week, that's amazing.
Impressive.
I have no idea how you managed that. But if that's the case, you're going to want to fast forward, go straight to the picks of the week. You can find those. There's a link in the timestamps immediately below the video.
Mm-hmm. But for now, spoiler fade, go. All right, so for those of you who have read the issue already or don't mind spoilers, welcome back. Let's talk about Bobby Drake. So, Rachel, what's up with Iceman?
He's gay. Bobby Drake came out this week, and the 16-year-old time displaced version of it specifically, and I'm really, really happy about that. Presumably this means that the older adult Iceman is also gay, and we're going to get, that story as well, which is actually really awesome, because something you don't really get to see a lot in mainstream media especially is characters coming out as older adults, which happens a lot in real life.
Mm-hmm. So the joys of time travel, we get to see lots of stuff. And Bendis has specifically said that where older Bobby Drake is with this whole thing is going to be addressed in Uncanny X-Men number 600. So we are going to get to see that. We just don't know what happens yet. So this is a really big deal because we've certainly had coming out stories in comics and superhero comics, even in Marvel Comics before, but I don't think we really have with so prominent and central a character. I mean, Iceman isn't like, Wolverine or Captain America or one of the front and center printed on backpacks kind of characters, but he's been around for literally the entire history of the X-Men. Somebody who's even passingly familiar with Marvel, even if they've just seen some of the movies, they're going to know who Iceman is, and now we have a character that prominent coming out as gay, and that's awesome.
Yeah, there is Deadpool, so who's pretty visible.
Deadpool's Deadpool.
Yeah, that's true. And a kind of more complicated case, but I mean, part of the deal with Iceman is that he's one of the original five. He's been around since the very start. He's got a degree of sticking power, of name recognition, and of visibility that, I don't think any other queer superhero has ever had, and that feels like a huge step.
Yeah. And now, Rachel, you wrote an article for Playboy.com that came out, I believe, a couple of days ago about this whole thing, about Iceman coming out and sort of what that means and the implications. And I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about that.
Okay, well, first of all, I should say that after writing 4,000 words about it, I am a little reluctant to rehash too much of that. That you can read that right now at Playboy.com. We're also going to be reposting it at our site on Saturday, so if you don't want to, click through to there, that's also cool. You're just gonna have to wait an extra day. Mm-hmm. And that talks a lot about the scene itself and about the reactions to the scene, and addresses some of the responses, and also sort of grounds my response to it, which was, I will say, I'm not going to go into detail, really positive.
Yeah, me too.
To my own history, because this is a scene that, telepathy notwithstanding, rang really, really, really true to my own experience coming out of 16. That's not the case for everyone, and I actually do want to talk about that a little bit, because when something like this happens, I mean, this is a really big deal. This is something that kind of feels like we might only get one of it, because it's a, original A-list Marvel character, Marvel superhero coming out. And I think there are a lot of people who are very, very hungry for what straight kids kind of get as a default, which is to see their own experiences and challenges and turning points and milestones reflected in media that they love, that means a lot to them. That's a really important thing. That's something that everyone, I think, is really hungry for and needs. And when you're part of a group that's vastly underrepresented, it's been largely marginalized, there is a huge amount of buildup and a huge amount of the stakes for something like this feel so high, because it feels like, what if this is our only chance? What if this is all we get? Like, that's the question that's there every single time. And that makes the stakes high, both for readers, but also for the execution of the scene. And I think the solution to that is not, for readers to not be offended. It's not for readers to not want the things they want. It's for there to be more. Because we're not going to get a coming out story that encapsulates my experience and your experience and everyone else's experience, because it's really personal and it's really varied. There are, part of the conversation that's come, that's come out around this has been, things that people have been between two groups of people who find a very specific point of it either absolutely unacceptable and have had really traumatic and really upsetting experiences related to it, and people for whom that exact same thing was a really positive thing. And those are both real and valid experiences. And they're both important, I think, to express and to show. And I guess what I would ask of readers, and what I hope people can see, and what I hope they won't have to as representation becomes wider, is that this is one story. This is not going to involve, it's not going to cover everyone's experience, and it's not necessarily going to cover best practices, because it's, a group of fictional and fallible characters being written as fallible.
Plus time travel.
Yeah, and telepathy, which definitely changes a lot of what's going on. But the fact that a story doesn't reflect all of my experience, all of what I'm looking for, doesn't make my experience less real or valid. It doesn't make my perspective less real or valid. It doesn't negate it. And the fact that someone else can look at that story and say, no, this is perfect, this is spot on, this is exactly what I need, doesn't make me wrong, and it doesn't make them wrong. What's wrong is that we don't both get that. What's wrong is that we don't have, that full spectrum expressed, that we don't have enough of those stories. So I guess I'm just asking folks who are reading this and responding to it to remember that even if it's not your story, it's someone's, and that person's perspective on an experience of queerness and of coming out is as real as yours.
Okay, so with that, let's dive back into the normal order of things. Rachel, what's our issue of the week?
I think our issue of the week this week is absolutely All New X-Men number 40.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really solid issue. It's a really solid character piece for most of the cast. And whether or not you are down with the kind of pivotal scenes in it, it's a really important issue.
Absolutely.
It's one that's worth tracking down and reading even if you're not following the series. And issue of the week. What's our panel of the week?
So our panel of the week is from this week's issue of Amazing X-Men, and it's right after they get Juggernaut's helmet off, which is the usual beating Juggernaut trick, and it doesn't actually work. And Juggernaut says, "Every weakness I had is gone. You want to stop me? You can't." And then it just cuts to this full splash page of this, which is some of my favorite lettering I've seen in a comic ever. Like, I want this on the side of my van. I'd have to have a van first. I may buy a van so I can put this on the side of it. I love it.
I gotta say, this whole issue uses comics so well and uses sound effects so well. Like, the storytelling in here is great in general. It's fun, but that page is so good.
Yeah, just everything I want. It's basically Hulk smash for the Juggernaut, and even better. Good stuff. So that's it for this week. Thanks for watching.
If you like what you've seen here, please check out our podcast, Rachel and Miles Explain the X-Men. New episodes go up every Sunday at rachelandmiles.com, also on iTunes and Stitcher, and I should say, also relevant to this week's reviews, that over the next couple days, we're going to be posting a lot of additional stuff about X-Men number 40 at rachelandmiles.com, including my Playboy.com op-ed on Saturday, and hopefully an interview with Brian Michael Bendis. But before all of that, what's going to be on the podcast this week?
So this week we are finally at X Factor number 1, the launch of the third major X-Men series, and one that Rachel and I are both very fond of. We are super excited.
That podcast, these video reviews, and everything on the website are brought to you, as always, by our awesome Patreon subscribers. We are an entirely listener-supported and ad-free podcast and project. If you want to join the fine folks making this possible and help us work towards some really cool new milestone goals, you can do that at the link right below.
In the meantime, we will see you next time.
Yeah, sorry about the rictus grin at the end there.
That's all right. It's worthwhile.
I meant it at first, and then I couldn't figure out what to do with my face afterwards.
You know what I like about this cover?
What?
North Star doesn't look unconscious. He just looks like he's totally over it.